All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out. Of all the things you could be doing on a Saturday afternoon, you've chosen to spend it with us. Welcome to HOFT Institute if you've not been here before. My name is John Henderson. I'm program coordinator for the Game Design and Development Lab. My colleagues Justin Andrews and Sarah Abraham are here, as well as some students if you haven't met them. But just to let everyone know, this is the third in our monthly series of speakers. We'll at least have another one booked for next month and hopefully announce it very soon. But again, this is the kind of stuff for people that don't get to talk to someone who is a bona fide developer and get a little bit of insight that will go a long way. And our speaker this afternoon is a narrative designer in the mobile department at EA's offices here in Austin. Please welcome Carmen Askerneese.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So as John mentioned, my name is Carmen Askerneese. I recognize some of your faces. I've met a lot of you before. How many of you all are interested in being a game developer? Yeah, okay, awesome. I'm in the right place then. So first thing that we're going to talk about is, who am I? Like, who is this guy? Why is he talking to us, right? Well, I'm a narrative designer at EA Austin. I'm working on the Simpsons Tapped Out right now. I'm also working on an unannounced project, which means I can't tell you about it. But if you have questions about what goes into working on those secret hush-hush projects, then we can talk around it. Because I feel like there's still a lot to be learned about those types of situations and signing NDAs, which are non-disclosure agreements. So a little bit about my background. I started off working on Madden Mobile after I graduated with my Master's of Science degree from FIEA, which is a branch of UCF. I was also working on NBA Live Mobile at the time. So working on two different game projects is a little bit of a balancing act, right? How many of you all, when you were in school, were taking more than one class at a time, right? Have you ever had any of those nights where you're like, I have a test in class A tomorrow and I have homework in class B due at midnight and I'm about to pull my hair out? That's what it's like working on two game projects at the same time. But luckily you're on a team, and game development is very much a team sport. So there are other people that you can help balance the load with, and it makes things a little bit easier. So my education, I went to UCF, like I mentioned, for graduate school. My undergraduate was at Texas Tech University in Lubbock. Did anybody go to Tech? No? Oh, I didn't think so. But yeah, so I went there, and at Texas Tech, I studied electronic media and communications. That's a long word to say undecided. But I really went there with the intent to be in the games industry. At Tech, they didn't have a game department during the time I was there. So my friends and I, we wanted to find a way to make our own game experience because we were determined to be developers. So we created this thing called Heads Up Display. Heads Up Display was a video game review show, a YouTube channel, and it came around the time when G4, which was this gaming-centered television network, just went out of business. It completely disappeared. IGN wasn't as popular back then, so there was kind of this gap in the market. And this little scrappy group of students was like, we're gonna fill that gap. Everybody's gonna watch us in West Texas talking about games. It was pretty ambitious. That didn't end up that way, but we gained a lot of good experience working on the project. My experience doing that got me into UCF, and the FIEA program selects between 60 and 70 students each cohort. I was the 12th cohort, and we started with 66 and we finished with 55. So it is a accelerated program that challenges you by making you make games from the first day you arrive. So I was late because I was at a wedding, and I got there on like the third or fourth day, and they were like, welcome to FIEA. You're 3 or 4 days late into your development cycle. You have 2 days left to make a game. I'm like, what? So yeah, and if you fail any of the assignments, then you get kicked out of the university, right? It's like, oh, really scary. But we were making a game in Flash. So I was determined not to fail because I was working at Best Buy, and I moved to Orlando with $100. So I was like, I can't afford to drive back to Texas, so I better pass this exam or whatever. Stayed up all night making a Flash game. And by the time I finished as a project lead for our capstone project. It was like our thesis statement. And our game was called Child No More. There's a really small photo of the poster there if you can see it. So let's go into the journey. So every one of us has different experience, right? How many of you all are HOFT students actually? Okay, so most of you. I wasn't, but I think that in the long run, it doesn't really matter where you go to school. What matters is where you end up, and we all want to end up being game developers. But the way that we get there is different. There is no set in stone path to get into the game industry. And if you want to be a designer, or if you want to be an artist, if you want to be an engineer, those are all three very different pathways. So one of the things that I didn't know when I was starting out is the most important skill you can have are communication skills. Because building a network, talking to other people, forming meaningful relationships are what's going to get you into the industry. You could be the best programmer or designer or artist. You could win awards for all those things, but if you don't know how to work on a team or communicate well with your teammates, it's not going to work out, because game development is very much a team sport. So after I left Texas Tech, went to UCF, and I graduated from UCF with my master's degree, I was like, all right, I'm done, where's my job? But that didn't work out like that. So we have this thing called venture track, which people who are left behind after the Thanos snap, they can study, thank you, they can study to keep their skills up. So I was doing that for a while. We were working on a VR escape room. Has anybody used virtual reality stuff before? Yeah? Okay, cool. So I don't have to explain it. Y'all kind of know what it is. Has anybody done an escape room before? Okay, so an escape room is sort of like a locked room challenge. There are puzzles throughout the room. You have to solve these puzzles to open the locks, find the clues, and get the code to get out of the room in time before your time runs out. We were creating something like that, but more story-driven. And the whole idea behind our game is there is an interactor in the 3D space with you. So that was me for our game. We had 2 HTC Vives, and we were able to network those 2 Vives together. So you could have one player in the space as the player character and another person as the NPC or the interactor who you could interact with in real time. So we used ray tracing and a lot of other really technical stuff that I won't go into to set up a real world space where everything you interacted with in the play space was actually physically represented in the room. And it sounds impressive, but like it was pretty janky because we were students. But we had some investors come in, and I learned a lot from that experience about how you can not only sell a product, but how to, I don't like using the word sell yourself, but I mean, that's kind of what it is, right? So you all have to convince the people that you're applying to a job for that you are the right fit for their team. You're the missing piece that they need on their team, and you're going to help them achieve the goals that they want to achieve, right? So when we were speaking to those investors, we were just students and we didn't really know what we were doing. So we were really hyped about the technology, hyped about the things we were doing, but that's not really what they were looking for. So it didn't end up working out. But because of that experience, someone the investors knew was a recruiter at EA Sports in Orlando, which is where I got my first job. And they saw our prototype and helped me get a job there. So once I started off at EA, I was like, all right, I did it. Like if I'm an athlete, I made it to the league, right? I'm in the big time now. But you know, I was just making Madden. And I don't know about you guys, but sports games aren't my favorite. I actually never really played them after I got out of like high school or whatever. But what I've learned is when you're a professional developer, a lot of the times you're not making a game for yourself. You're making it for whoever that target audience is. So I tried to shift my focus, and I was like, what kind of person enjoys the Madden experience? And what are the things about it that makes this experience escapism for them, right? When we think about escapism, we think that it means finding a media that helps us forget about our current life or situation. But that's not always the case. I feel like escapism is a broader term than that. For some people, they just want to be engaged in a particular activity, in a particular world, in a particular craft. And in sports, you're not really taking on the persona of this great hero and going on an adventure. You're taking on the persona of an athlete. Sometimes you're even just being a coach in like Football Manager or something like that. You're managing statistics. So it was a different mindset for me because I'm not used to playing those kind of games. And one of the important lessons that I learned from that I think is going to help all of you is really think about who the game is for. There are some instances where you're making a game and you're the target audience. That's a lot easier. Like, what kind of games do I like to play? I know that, right? But when you're designing for someone else, it can be a bit of a different challenge. So I'm a narrative designer. What does that mean? What do I do? So there are three main facets of my job. I write, I design systems, I collaborate with my teammates. So as a writer, I'm working on a licensed product. What that means is that we are working on an established IP that someone else owns, and we're licensing the rights to make a game about that IP. So that means we have to make sure that we're true to the story, the characters, and the setting that they've already established. So we can't have like Nathan Drake and Master Chief show up and start shooting aliens with, I mean, we could probably do that. That would be on brand for The Simpsons, actually. But the idea still is the same, that there are some things that are outside of their brand that they wouldn't want us to do. So as a writer for that project, I work in a writer's room. Has anybody ever been in a writer's room before? Okay, awesome. This is good. Then I can chew into this for a little bit then. So in a writer's room, how do you guys think that works? Just somebody raise your hand and tell me how you think that works.
I think there's a couple of, like 4 or 5 different writers just sitting there and spitballing and tossing around things and just discussing, hey, how about this, what about this, what about that? That's how I imagine that too.
Okay, anybody else?
Maybe some kind of storyboarding or like post-it notes, kind of collect ideas together.
Okay, give me one more.
A giant whiteboard.
Yeah, so all of those things are true, actually. So you need the giant whiteboard for the post-it notes, and then you write down all the ideas that everybody's throwing out. But there's one other thing that you guys didn't get, and that's there's usually someone who's the head writer or the showrunner in television, right? So for our game, our head writer is the lead writer for the Simpsons television show. He's not here, he's in California. So usually how it works is there's another designer and myself, another writer and myself, and we riff back and forth with the sticky notes on the whiteboard of like, so we want to create an event that's themed around Halloween, and we want it to have monsters. What kind of monsters? Maybe elder gods or eldritch gods like Cthulhu, right? So a lot of the times we just toss around any kind of idea that we think fits within the brand. And once we come up with something that we feel like our head writer would be okay with, we pitch that to him. Sometimes he gives us feedback and he's like, well, maybe we can have monsters, but why don't we make them like classic TV monsters? Or why don't we make it about superheroes or something different? So your idea can completely change. There are other times where he's like, yeah, that sounds good, go do that. And there are other times where he's like, no, I hate that actually, just do something completely different. And I think that there is a misconception about having complete creative freedom as a writer in a writer's room. That's not entirely true unless you're the head writer, really. But there's another scenario which I learned, I don't work in a scenario like this, but I learned this from a networking connection that I have with someone here in town. How many of you have played a game called BioShock? Yeah, okay, almost everybody, awesome, I don't have to explain it. So in BioShock, there's this really awesome plot twist at the end. And I won't tell you what it is. For those of you who have played it, you probably know. If you haven't, then I won't ruin it for you. But I learned that plot twist was one of the center things that was planned from the very beginning when they were writing that game. And there was only one writer who was working directly with the creative director for that project. And what she told me is like, it's the best feeling and the worst feeling at the same time. Because you have creative freedom to sort of tell the story that you want to tell, have the message that you want to send, but at the same time, you have this tremendous responsibility, right? Because especially now that there's such a focus on narrative and storytelling, you could have an entire game that's like dependent on the story being good, and if you don't do well, then it's going to sink the whole project. So for that project, it wasn't specifically designed to be a story game. Kind of ended up that way, but that wasn't the intent. And the writer that I spoke to about it, she was telling me that when she went into the project, the creative director already had an idea of sort of what the themes were, what kind of story they wanted to tell, how that fit in with the mechanics, and that made the process a little bit easier and took off some of that pressure. But those are sort of the two different types of writing environments that you may see in a creative studio. And that goes for film and for games. So systems design, what is that? Who thinks they know what a systems designer is? Yeah? All right, awesome. What do you think?
Basically numbers. Like how do the mechanics fit together? How do they influence honestly kind of their, like how do they fit in with the narrative? How do they fit in with like the I can't remember words at the moment.
That's okay.
Basically numbers, mechanics, how everything sort of fits together between visuals, again mechanics, audio, making sure that everything works.
Yeah, that's actually a really good answer. Did you have something too? Okay, cool. Well, you guys are actually pretty spot on. So a systems designer is sort of like someone who sets up a Rube Goldberg machine. Do y'all know what those are? Perfect. So you're trying to figure out how you can have all these different pieces of this game work together and create a singular experience for the player. There are some times where you'll get down the line in the development process and there's a system that you designed from the beginning that was really cool and it functions really well, but it doesn't fit. And so you just have to cut it. And that's one of the hard things about being a systems designer is like you fall in love with this really great system, you find something that you think is really going to be engaging for the player, but it just doesn't work. It doesn't mean that you can't use it later in a different project, it just means that it's not going to work right now, right? So for a mobile game, it's a little bit different. A lot of our, much to people's dismay, a lot of our systems are designed around how we can set up a freemium model. So what that means is the game is free, and there are in-app purchases that you can use, that you can pay for to get additional content within the game, right? And so when we design systems like that, our pillar, or what we're designing around, is how can we monetize the product so that we can get revenue, so that we can continue to make more updates, right? It's all a system in and of itself, right? If we don't monetize the product, if we just give the game away for free, we don't make any money, then we can't make more updates for the game. We can't make any other games because we're all unemployed, and that wouldn't work out. So the third thing we do is collaboration. Game development is a team sport. I'm going to say that over and over and over again because it is. And if you are going to work on a game team, then a lot of the times in the interview process, you'll interview with everyone on that team. And the reason they do that is to see if you're a personality fit. So this can be a double-edged sword, right? Like sometimes you're a really talented developer, you're a really great team player, you're getting along really well with your teammates, and then something happens and there's just a disagreement between you and someone else on the team. So what do you do in those kind of scenarios? Well, a lot of the times it's just a miscommunication, especially if you're working remotely with people. If you're using Slack or Skype or anything like that to communicate, a lot of intent and tone of voice and things like that can be lost in translation, and that can lead to difficulty in communicating what you're actually trying to say with your teammate. So does anybody know the difference between constructive criticism and feedback? It was a trick question. Okay, what about you?
I'd say feedback is just kind of what you think about something, like giving someone feedback, and constructive criticism is offering them ideas of how to maybe improve it.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good example. So the reason I say constructive criticism and feedback and not negative feedback is because you don't want to get to a point in your career where you're giving anyone negative feedback. I think that constructive criticism is appropriate, but I think there's a time and place for it. And there are a lot of times where you can give people constructive criticism and that's not what they were looking for. So for example, if we're on a design team together and you're heading up a design and it's about putting in air conditioning units to school buildings in the summertime in Texas because it's hot, right? That's really great. And you're like, hey, this is the system design I have for air conditioning units. I want you to give me some feedback on it. And then I come at you like, actually, you know what? I really don't like the way that you laid out this flow for this document because I feel like it doesn't communicate, like No, you're asking me to give you feedback on this specific thing. So I think that that's a learned skill that can hurt a lot of people's career when it comes to collaborating with their teammates. All right, so how can I grow my career once I've gotten to the industry? So this is something that I've learned. I'm 3 years into my professional career now. And this is something that's a really hard lesson for a lot of people to learn, and a lot of people never learn it. But the 3 things that are going to help you grow your career are being a part of the industry, making meaningful connections, and taking classes and workshops. So if you're not in the industry, if you're not in that community and you're not engaged in it, then you're not going to know how to alter your career and alter your skill set so that you can stay relevant. So I'm working on a mobile product right now, but we're about to switch gears and work on an unannounced project. I can't tell you what it is, but it's not a mobile product, right? So if my skill set is tailored to mobile development and I don't know how to alter my skill set or to learn new skills, I'm not going to be able to maintain my career in that particular role or in that particular studio. It's the same thing for anything else. There are some studios who make console games, they switch to make VR games. Very different types of development, and vice versa. So being engaged in the industry, seeing what kind of trends are happening at different studios, seeing what kind of games are being made by different studios, how players are responding to those things, what stuff's being announced at E3, what stuff's happening at GDC, like being aware of that kind of stuff. Even if you don't attend those conferences, 'cause some of them can be pretty expensive. Just kind of having an idea, having your finger on the pulse of what's happening is really important. So making meaningful connections. Like I mentioned, I recognize some of you. I've spoken to you before, and some of you reached out to me on LinkedIn after we spoke last time, which is really great. I'm glad that you did that. If you haven't, you should do that if you want to make a meaningful connection. There are a few people like me who, we go out of our way, we try to help students, and those are the kind of people that you want to make connections with. Some of those people are not going to want to connect with you, and that's okay. Like, it's okay for people to say no. It's okay for you to say no. Like, once you get to where I am, maybe there are students who will be in your shoes who are like, hey, can we connect? It's okay to say no. Like, maybe you just aren't in a spot right now where you can help someone. Maybe you just need to focus on your career. Maybe you're transitioning between jobs. Like, that's okay. So I think that when you go to conventions, when you go to guest lectures, when you go to meetups, talk to people and try to get to know them and their journey, and try to get to know, like, how can I have a meaningful connection with this person? Now, don't force it, because it's awkward and it's super obvious when you try to force it. But I think that, being a part of that network and having connections is going to help you grow your career. I had some friends who were working at this studio. It was a really popular studio called Telltale. Any of you ever heard of that? Yeah. So my friends were telling me that they were really excited because they just announced Wolf Among Us 2. They were going to work on it, and the voice actors were going to come in later that week, and they were going to record the script and all this kind of stuff. They go into work just like any other day, and they have this big town hall, and the studio's shutting down, right? Just out of nowhere that happens. So unfortunately, in the entertainment industry, in the games industry, that happens a lot. I've been through that before, and when that kind of stuff happens, it's important to have those meaningful connections so that you can reach out to those people and say, hey, like, is there anything open at your studio? Is there anything that you know about that you can put me in touch with somebody for? Those kind of connections are really important. So I was speaking to somebody earlier, and you all said there are cohorts that you have here at HOFT. So we have cohorts at FIEA too, and we have an alumni Facebook group and Discord too, because Facebook's old. It is. But so anyway, usually when there are people who experience those layoffs or who are going through a transition period, they'll post in that Facebook group or in that alumni group, and we'll all try to, like, help them find something new. And I think that that's a really important resource that you guys can create for yourself here if you don't already have it. Your classmates are the first people that you're going to be networking with. So try not to burn bridges. I mean, be yourself, be authentic, but also just don't be an asshole. Just don't be one. It just makes your life so much harder. And try to keep in touch with those people, because you're all after the same thing. When I asked about going to the game industry, you all raised your hands. So you all have the same goal. You can help one another get there. Taking workshops and classes. So if you want to be a game designer and if you want to be a writer, those are two different things. A lot of the times being a writer is lumped in under game design. So is being a systems designer. So being a game designer is a really vague thing nowadays. But I would encourage you to decide what it is that makes you inspired to be in this industry, what it is that you're passionate about, and find out how you can continue to grow your skill set in that thing. Some people will tell you that you need to focus on one thing, you need to pick one discipline, and just go all in on that one discipline. I kind of disagree with that just because I have a background in production, and I started off as a producer, and now I'm the systems designer, and now I'm a writer, and so on and so forth. So I think that the trade-off with that type of skill set is you're never going to be, I shouldn't say never, it's going to be harder for you to be a master at a particular skill set because your time is divided amongst so many other skill sets. So if you're okay with that, then cool, I'm okay with that, so that's what I'm going to do. But if you want to be the best programmer like nobody ever was, then focus on being the best programmer and find ways that you can take workshops, take skill classes, and learn those new things that you need to learn. On the desk over there are some flyers for some upcoming classes and workshops. So that's a great opportunity for you all to take those things. You're already in the HOFT network. And if you don't want to take those, there's some on YouTube. There's some on Unity and Unreal's website. They each have their own academy or certification or something of the sorts. So always stay learning stuff. You're never going to be done, and when you're done, your career's over. So unfortunately, that's the industry that we work in, but that's why we love it. It's because it's always challenging us and making us better. All right, so what do hiring managers look for on a portfolio? You made it into the industry, you're making the connections, you're forming your network, you've got all that good stuff down, and now you're making a portfolio for yourself. So I'm going to go through each of these and tell you what a portfolio looks like for those types of areas of design. If you want to be something other than a designer, we can talk about that, and I can give you a little bit of insight into what those portfolios would look like. So if you want to be a game designer, just game design, no specification or anything of the sort, then the main thing people are going to be looking for on your portfolio are design documents. So there are technical design documents, there are pitch documents for pitching a new game idea, and there are feature documents. So feature and technical documents sound similar, but they're very different. So in a technical document, you're going to tell me how a feature functions and also the systems that go into that feature. And in a feature document, you're giving me the high level of what that feature is and why we should make it. So for example, in NBA Live, a tech document is I'm designing the new dashboard for NBA Live. This is how the dashboard functions. If you click these buttons, this happens. If you go to these different pages, this is what the layout looks like. A feature design is, we need a new dashboard for the game, and I think that it needs to include these things. How's it going to include those things? I don't know. I'll tell you in the tech design document. So those are the difference between those types of documents. For a game or narrative designer or a writer, the things that we want to see on your portfolio are writing samples. Do you know, so this is kind of a test for the people I talked to last time. Do you remember what a bark is? You do? What is a bark?
It's a quick piece of text characters will say without prompt.
Exactly. Awesome. Good job. So a bark is a quick line of dialogue that happens usually during an action sequence without any prompt, right? So if you're in a shootout and you're playing Uncharted, and then Nate's like, oh, the bad guy's jumping into the helicopter, and we got to get him, or whatever. He's going to say something more clever than that. But so that's a bark. The classic ones are like reloading, take cover, all that kind of stuff. So we want to see that you can come up with those types of barks. And we want to see different scripts in different genres. So show me your drama script, show me your comedy, show me your romance. Those different types of scripts are going to show that you have range. And there may be a studio that's making like all action games, and they have a posting for a writer, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to put my action stuff on here. You don't know what that new game is. Maybe it's a interactive narrative that's all about romance and stuff. Like, so you want to be able to show that you have a range, you can do different things. So for a level designer, I put Portal up here because it's the easiest example. When I was in graduate school, our level design class started off with us using a Portal mod, and they were like, okay, go and create some new, I think it was in Portal 2, where you could like kind of customize levels and make your own levels or whatever. So we had to create new levels in Portal 2 that weren't already done by other people. So to do that, we had to play all the other levels that were already done. But by playing those levels, we learned sort of how people were thinking about these level designs for Portal. So level design and set dressing are different. Some people mistake set dressing for level design. Set dressing is, I have this space, and now I'm going to use 3D assets to decorate the space. So for example, if we have this room, and say it was an empty room, and you have all the stuff that's in here right now are assets that you have. Placing those assets is set dressing. Level design is Uncharted again, because it's an easy example. Nate and Sully are going to a jungle. And in this jungle, there needs to be 3 combat sections, 2 narrative sections, and a place for platforming. So those are your requirements for the level, and it's up to you to figure out how that looks. So when you're designing all that stuff and laying it out, and you're creating that jungle setting, it's up to you to figure out what is the flow of gameplay. Like, am I going to have combat narrative, or am I going to have combat narrative, platforming, combat? Like, so mixing up those different elements and setting the flow and the pacing for a level can really have a huge impact when the player gets ready to play it. And it can also have an impact on the game overall. So level designers are super important, and people want to see that you understand those concepts on your portfolio. So if you have a level design portfolio, it's important that you talk about the choices that you made in the level that you set up. Because if you just have it on there and you're doing a walkthrough video of like, here's my level, and look at all this cool stuff in it. And that's great that you have all the cool stuff in the animations, but we want to know why you're making those choices and what your thought process is behind it. So for a systems designer, I won't spend too much time on this since I talked about it earlier, but if you have more specific questions, we're going to have a Q&A soon, so you can ask then. But on a systems design portfolio, what we want to see is game footage of systems that you've made from start to finish, right? So if you designed Civilization is the one I have up here, so let's use that. So have you all played Civilization before? Okay, awesome. In case you haven't, people online, somebody asked me to do that, so there you go. If you haven't played Civilization before, the whole idea is you are a particular race or nation, and you're trying to expand over the course of time and grow your technology, grow your resources, and become a utopia, essentially. But there's always the threat of other nations and of like wild barbarians and the elements and all kinds of whatnot. So in a game like that, if you're in a multiplayer setting, one of the systems could be, how does my army interact with another player's army, right? So you can do that in a bunch of different ways. Maybe every time those armies are within a 5-foot square proximity of one another, combat initiates. Or maybe when the armies are close to each other, a dialogue box pops up and you can negotiate. Or maybe there's another way that you have some kind of negotiation tactic. So those types of systems and how they work and how you incorporate those systems into the larger game as a whole are what you will want to see on a systems designer's portfolio. All right. So if you're looking to grow your skill set, or if you're just like, I want to learn more about a different skill set I don't know much about right now, these are some of the resources that I know about that can help you do that. I'm sure that there are others. I'm sure that your professors could give you others. But this is kind of small, so I'll read it out to you. So there's Pluralsight. Pluralsight is a tutorial website, and they have, they claim to be like a professional tutorial website. I don't think that the quality of the other tutorials I'm going to mention are any less than the ones on here. But usually if there's a corporation that's looking to up-level their employees, they'll go to Pluralsight because they have a preset lesson plan based on each person's skill set, and they make you take an assessment before that. There's also Udemy. So Udemy is a little bit more affordable than Pluralsight is, and that's usually where I go. It's like I said, it's cheaper to use. The tutorials are the same quality, and a lot of the times you'll get professors with different perspectives on Udemy than you would get on Pluralsight. Especially for a designer, like it's great to learn from like whoever the designer of legend is for you, like Kojima. If Kojima like came and was like, hey, let me tell you all about this weird Ink Baby game I'm making, then that would be really great, and I would love to learn about that. But I also want to learn from the people making like that new game that just came out from Remedy, Control. Well, it comes out pretty soon. I would like to learn about like how they designed that game. What were their thought process behind that? So I think it's really great to get different perspectives on how people look at design and why they make the decisions that they do. All right, so Unreal and Unity on their websites. There's the Unreal Academy on their website. On the Unity website, they have a whole like playlist of tutorials that you can go through, and a lot of them are project-based. So there are tutorials available on YouTube, but if you're specifically looking to learn those engines, I would suggest going to their website and using their project-based lesson plans. Because if you do that, once you finish, you have a project or a prototype that you can show, and then you can go back through that tutorial again, tweak some of the stuff to make the project or prototype your own, and use that as a portfolio piece. So I think that's really important. If you're more traditional, you want to read books or you want to look at blogs, there's a book called The Design of Everyday Things. It's by Don Norman. It was a really great book. I read it in graduate school, and you'll never look at doors the same after you read this book. But it's the same thing as I mentioned with the design tutorials, when you especially for books, because there's a book called The Theory of Fun, and it was one of the required texts for my graduate school. And we read it, and I was like, oh man, this is really great. I learned so much. And then once I started working in the industry, I met someone who was like, oh, I work with that guy. He's kind of weird. I don't know if you should listen to that stuff. And I was like, well, I mean, okay, but like, why do you think that? So whether or not the guy is weird or whether or not he knows what he's talking about doesn't matter. It's just I'm getting those different perspectives and understanding how those people look at the same problem differently. Then I can make my own decisions about it. So that's important. If you're looking to read blogs, there are a lot of developers on Twitter. So if you don't have a social media account and you don't like it, I'm sorry. But I would suggest that you at least make a professional one so that you can be a part of those communities and you can have access to those people's blogs, because there's really important information on there. Especially if you want to be a writer or a narrative designer, there are a lot of working writers and narrative designers who have running blogs about how to get into the industry, how to make writing portfolios, how to negotiate contracts and prices if you're going to be a contract writer. All that stuff is super invaluable. And I actually use that to create my portfolio. So super helpful stuff. And lastly, going to game jams, the Global Game Jam, which I believe happens here. Definitely participate in game jams. Those projects are really, really great for portfolios, especially if you are working on something like Games for Good, like those types of things. Those are really great. So yeah, take those opportunities when they arise. And lastly, if you want to contact me or keep in touch, my contact information is here. You can also see it on the board over here. So we're about to do two things. I want to do Q&A with you all, and then I'm going to show you my portfolio site so you can have an idea of what a portfolio site should look like. But if you have any questions, I'm open to those.
One hand for Carmen.
Thank you.
Now we can do questions.
So I saw you and then you. So you first.
So I'm actually studying to be a systems designer. You mentioned like the kind of what the hardest thing being like, oh, you have this like really cool, system that you set up, and then it turns out this game no longer has any need of that particular system. Other than that, what would you say some of the kind of bigger sort of hurdles or lessons to be learned when it comes to systems design is, both in practice and as part of the industry?
Sure. So I think one of the hardest things when you're getting started is having valuable experience to put on a portfolio. Because the example I use is Civilization, but if you're a student or an indie developer, you're not working on Civilization. So like, what do I do? So yeah, I think in that situation, doing game jams and creating your own projects would be really good. The unfortunate part about that is that's going to challenge you to learn some additional skills also, but it's only going to help you in the long run. As far as being in the industry and some of the issues, or challenges rather, I think that sort of as a designer, right, you're going to have to design within a box, and that's part of the fun. But as a systems designer, the box is just a little bit smaller, especially if you're working on a mobile or freemium game, right? Because it's like, I have to design a system that works with all these other systems that have been around for like 7 years, and they all just kind of are a ball of tape, and then it also has to make money. So yeah, I think that, it's part of the fun, but it can be a little bit of a headache sometimes.
So you said that when you were younger, you started making a show, a heads-up display, and now you're working in like narrative design for games. So how does that, what parts of it do you think transfer over, and how is making a narrative for a game different from like a movie or a show?
That's a really great question. So I think that the transferable part is, our show ended scripted. It didn't start that way. We were just kind of winging it at first. Don't do that. It was really bad, super bad. But yeah, so writing those scripts and understanding how pacing works is really important. I think that those specific examples are the only ones I can think of off the top of the head that transfer to being a writer specifically. But when I was working on the show, like, I was managing everybody's schedule. I was making connections with other people. Like, all that kind of production aspect of it really transfer over to the game industry well. Maybe not specifically as a writer, but as a developer they do. And what was the other question you had?
I think you answered it.
Okay, cool, awesome. Any other questions?
So throughout your career, you've got a lot of advice from lots of different kinds of people. I'm interested in how you learn how to separate the good from the bad, because there are going to be some people that give you good advice, and you'll realize it later that it was good advice, but you might not right away. Then there are some other people that are just telling you BS and they don't know any better. And then there are some people that are actively trying to screw you up. And I just imagine you're going to hear lots of things as you pursue whatever, especially as you're trying to figure out early on what it is you want to do and are good at. So, you get any advice about how to tell when you're getting good advice about it?
Yeah, no, that's a super great question, especially when you're a student. So when I was starting out, I went to, I think it was DeVry, and because there was like nothing like this back then. Game design, game development was unheard of. People were like, what, you want to be a circus clown? Get out of here. So I went to DeVry and I was like, I want to be a writer in the games industry. And they kind of laughed a little bit and they were like, yeah, okay, but like, what do you really want to do? And I was like, well, I guess be a game designer. And they're like, okay, well, here's a bunch of like engineering classes, learn C++, I guess. And they just kind of like, cause like they don't know. I guess what I took away from that was I'm a very extremely decisive and deterministic person. So I was like, either you help me or not, like I'm gonna do this thing. So I think that my advice for sort of filtering through what is helpful and what isn't is to treat everything you hear as information. I mean, even the stuff I just told you, if you're like, I don't believe any of that, don't do it. Like, I think that it's important to let other people be a resource and not a guide. I think that that's that's the most important lesson, because like I mentioned when I started, nobody has the same path into the games industry. Like there's a friend of mine who like went to DigiPen, like got C's in high school, got into DigiPen somehow, and then went to the industry. And I was like, that's awesome. It didn't work out like that for me. So it's different for everyone. But definitely like have your eye on the prize, know what you want, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't get it or like lead you off the path from that.
So I have another question. You started out with your VR game, right? When you were working on that application, the escape room.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you said you talked to investors after that, they noticed your work. How did you go from developing like a VR game with like your team or whoever you're working with to getting the attention of investors like that?
That's a really great question. So we were developing, the game was called iMyth, I think. We were working on it, I don't know if it ever came out or not, but whatever. We were working on it, and then we went to Orlando IX, which was like Orlando's version of South by Southwest. And we were displaying it there, and like random people were coming by, and we were just talking to them. And one of those people happened to be an Imagineer at Disney. Because I mean, you never know who you're going to talk to. You just always be nice or whatever. Don't be an asshole. But so the Imagineer came by, and we were talking to him about what we were working on. He's like, "Oh man, this sounds really cool for what we're trying to do for an expansion for our park," which turns out to be the Star Wars thing they just released. But we didn't know that at the time. And so we were like, "Oh yeah, let's like have you talk to our project lead or whatever." It was me at the time, and I was like, "Oh yeah, let's go by the studio." Or so I don't know. I'm like 21, and I'm prepared for this. So we just kind of stumbled our way into it from that chance meeting with them. They were nice enough to actually come see what we had to offer, and they were impressed by it. But I think they were looking for some people who were a little more experienced, because there was a lot on the line with that project.
Attached to that, the event you went to, you were showcasing there? Did you have to pay for like a booth and all that too?
So normally yes, but because our professors at our school had a lot of connections, so we got to showcase there for free. And like showcasing at an event sounds like super glamorous. It sucks. It sucks really hardcore, because like you're at the table all day and it's super hot, and like it's a lot. But I think that the act of showcasing at the event sucks, but being there and like having the memories and meeting the people makes it worth it.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure thing.
I was wondering if you had more advice in regards to what kinds of projects you should show up in your portfolio, and specifically I'm kind of thinking like I've heard different advice in terms of should you just have a few really good ones, or should you have many to show your growth over time, or what should you focus on there?
That's a good question. So, what discipline are you?
I'm a
Programmer? Okay. So, a lot of the times, you're going to be showing code samples, and you're going to be showing like demos of the games that you're making. And I would suggest that you show 1 or 2 or 3, 4 max of your best projects, and then keep the others off of the portfolio. Because if they see those things and they're interested, you can always show them more later. So think of it like fishing, right? The first couple best things are like bait, and you're reeling them in with the bait. And then once they pique interest and they're like, "Oh, like we like some of the stuff you did, can you show us other stuff that you've worked on?" Then you can show them other stuff. And even if the other stuff isn't as good as what's on your portfolio, that shows growth. You can say, "Hey, this is where I started. This was my first project. These are the lessons I learned from it, and then it helped me get to what you saw in the portfolio." And that's going to be really impressive. Sure thing. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one. So I've been working in Indy for a while now, and I've made a lot of projects there, but I'm having trouble finding ways to and I get backtracking a bit. In Indy, you tend to wear a lot of hats because the budgets are smaller and the teams are smaller and stuff. On AAA, it seems like everything's a lot more specialized. So how can, if you have a really wide skill set but maybe not super specialized, how could you sell yourself to a bigger company like that? You know, like how could you pitch your indie experience as being valuable to a place like EA?
That's a really good question. So, what is your desired discipline when you get in?
I guess for some context, my studio just shut down, and I was hired to be an artist, but I ended up doing everything except except for coding, and kind of fell into a producer role also. So yeah.
Okay, but like if you were going to get hired at EA, what would you want to do?
I mean, eventually art director, but I know you don't start there. So some kind of art job, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I would suggest showing off the things that you've done on the indie projects that showcase your art skills, right? So if you want to be, like say you're like, I'm really interested in art, but I'm also okay being a producer or something else, have 2 separate portfolios. So have one that really makes your art shine and have another that shows off your project management skills. And if you have projects that have been released, those are always more impressive than works in progress or canceled projects. Because we can go look it up and play it and get other people's feedback and look at reviews and all that kind of stuff. So, and the biggest thing though, besides the portfolio, is going to be making network connections. So I think that you're off to a really good start coming here today. And there's an artist that I work with. Her name is Lauren Brown, and she's always looking to help other artists in the community. So, yeah, I definitely think that it's a bit of a grind to try to go from indie to pro, as you know. But the network and the connections through people are always going to be way better than just applying through the website. Because a lot of the times you never really know who you're talking to, and depending on who that person is and like how involved they are with the hiring process, your resume could go to the top of the pile. So you need the resume and the portfolio to make sure when you get that shot that you're ready. And then once you get that interview, just do your best to impress them then.
And she's got a table at Akashicon at the Marriott up in Pflugerville, which is going today and tomorrow.
Yeah, you should stop by and try to talk to her. Like we can talk to me after and we can try to figure something out. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, like I mentioned, my contact information is here and it's also here if you can read that. Feel free to reach out with me with other questions or if you want advice on your portfolios. I'm thinking about setting up an event where we go through a design test and I'll teach you how those work. If you're not interested in design, it probably won't be that helpful, but it's still a fun thing to do. So yeah, feel free to ask me anything that you may need help with. I'm happy to help. So before we end though, I'm gonna show you what a portfolio website looks like, and then you can have a better idea of what those will be once you actually start doing it yourself. So, can everybody see that? Okay, so ignore my pixelated picture. But yeah. So mine is set up in a way where it's all just one page. And I got that from a friend of mine who showed me hers. And she was saying that like you want it to be as little information as possible. Because when people are going through these, they're going through like 1,000. And you're lucky if they look at your portfolio. Because usually what happens is like you send, especially if you apply online, you send in the resume, and we have a system that filters through it, and it looks for keywords on the resume with the job description. If you make it past that step, it'll get to a recruiter. Recruiter's going through it, and they're like, these are the few people we like. So out of that 1,000, it probably gets cut down to like 300 by the system. And out of those 300, the recruiter may cut it down to like 50. And out of those 50, they'll give it to the hiring manager. They'll probably cut it down to like 15. And then those 15, they'll actually look at the portfolios. That'll cut it down to like 4 or 5, and then they'll do the interviews from those people. So yeah, so mine is a little bit different. For yours, since you're students, I would suggest the first thing you see on your page should be your projects. For mine, since I have a few more years of experience for you guys, it's more important of like, who is this guy? Why should we care? So mine goes right into my resume. So for you, instead of having your resume on here, I would suggest having your projects because those are going to be more important. But the section should be set up in a similar way. If you have the option to add your resume like this, then I would suggest add your projects first, your resume second, your about page third, your contact information last, and nothing else. So let's go through my experience. So I have where I work right now, and I try to have some kind of visual aid with it because if it's all text a lot of the times, then people they're like not gonna really be focused on what they're reading. So I use the visual image to try to attract people's attention. You're going to get different advice on that. And like I mentioned before about advice, find what works for you. Take it all as information and decide how you want to do things. So I have the game that I'm working on right now, The Simpsons Tapped Out, what my role is on that project, narrative designer, and how long I've been working there. So I started in February of last year, and I still work there today. So this format of like having the title with the dash and then your role, that was like a weird Squarespace thing that I'm trying to figure out because I'm not a web developer. But if you can find a neater way to display that information, then obviously just doing that. So the next important thing that you have for each one of these is you want to list what you've done on that project that's of any value. So in this section, don't waste time on like really obvious stuff. Like if I was like, I wrote words. Actually, I think I do say that. Yeah, I do say that. It's like, duh, like that's your job. I would say only include stuff like that if it's really impactful, right? So it's like, we know you're a narrative designer, we understand what that means, but why should we care about this particular thing that you wrote? So for example, if I was working at Telltale before they shut down and I was a writer on The Walking Dead, I'm putting that on here because we won some awards, right? So that's important because I want them to know like, oh, hey, you know that really cool thing you like? I did that. So yeah, try to find ways to make your stuff really stand out and show why it's important for them to care. Let's move on to the next thing. So this is an ERG, an employee resource group that we have at EA. And for that, I was the local chairman for a while. And the reason I have this one here is because it's a leadership opportunity that's at a publicly traded company that puts me in direct contact with our executive staff. So if it was like a leadership position that wasn't as, like everybody knows what EA is, what places I'm applying to. So that's why I have it on here. But if it was for like heads-up display, like the show I had, I wouldn't include it because people aren't going to care. Unless I'm having a production portfolio. If my portfolio is simply about being a producer, then it's important to show that leadership experience. But as a designer, it's not important. And the only reason I have it on here as a designer is because now the positions I'm applying for are design lead, team lead, stuff like that. So I'm showing that I can be a designer and a writer, but I can also be a leader. So you want to make sure that the information you have on your site is extremely specific to whatever type of role it is that you're trying to apply for. All right, so let's go through some of this so you know what it looks like when you're putting leadership experience on your portfolio. All right, so I say I founded the Austin chapter of this employee resource group. So this is important because I'm saying like this thing didn't exist. I made this thing, right? So they're gonna be like, oh, that's really impressive. This person shows initiative and all that other kind of stuff that they like. And then there's some other stuff in here that doesn't really matter. Oh, and then I mentioned community outreach. So especially with EA, a lot of the stuff we're doing, we want to try to do a lot of volunteer work. So we did a thing recently where we picked up trash in East Austin. And I led one of those initiatives, and I started a STEAM program that we run a lot with high schools and middle schools in North Austin. So that kind of stuff is really important because it matches with the company's goals, and that's something that they're going to want to speak about in an interview. So that's why I put that on there. Oops. All right. Let's go down to my skills. So on your resume, the most important things on your resume are going to be your skills and your projects. A lot of the times, students will put their education higher, and I think it's really awesome to have your education on there. Don't omit it because it's important and you worked really hard for it. You paid a lot of money for it. But I think that the main thing that people are going to be looking at are what skills do you have and what kind of stuff are we going to have to train you on if we hire you onto our team. So a lot of the times, if you are a good fit for a studio, but let's say you've only used Unity and you never used Unreal, well, we can teach you that. But we can't teach you how to be a good culture fit for our studio. So if you get an interview and in the interview they ask you about something that you don't have the skill for, it's important to show that you don't, like, be honest, be like, I don't know that, or I don't have the skill at the moment, but I'm a fast learner and I can definitely pick that up through like some training or something of the sorts like that. So that stuff's really important. And your skills are probably the most important thing on your resume. And then I have the basic like contact thing. That's pretty obvious. But yeah, so really short and sweet, about page, resume, contact. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions about portfolio sites? It could be about anything, doesn't have to be about mine. No? Okay.
Would you recommend having multiple tabs? Like I've seen it before where people kind of have that, but they have it in multiple tabs. I see you have it kind of just all right there. We're just scrolling down. Do you think that's probably the better way to do it?
Gotcha. Yeah, so I go back and forth on that. My original site was a couple of different pages, but I switched to this one because it was a common theme between the writer portfolios that I was looking at to have them all as one page. Even mine is a little lengthy compared to the ones that I've been looking at because you have to scroll 5 or 6 times to get to the bottom. With theirs, it was usually like once, and it's like, bam, here's a gallery of all the projects I worked on, and each of them has a description with it, and then here's my contact information. And when you get to a certain point, like if you're Neil Druckmann, he's the guy who was the creative director for Last of Us, he's not listing his resume on here. Like, he doesn't need to do that. But I'm not Neil Druckmann, so I'm putting my resume. But yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think that kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Depending on what you're trying to show and what you're trying to highlight, that determines what type of layout you want to use for your website. I don't think that there's a wrong one per se. I just think that you should think about it as if they're going to spend 1 minute on my website. How do I display the most important information in that 1 minute that I have their attention?
On that note, are you QA testing for all the different browsers and mobile and all that stuff, or are you just trusting Squarespace to do it right by you?
So you should test. I'm not testing. I should be testing, but you busted me. I'm not testing at the moment. Any other questions?
Do you know when people are actually looking at it? Because I know Squarespace doesn't track traffic, but
Yeah.
opportunities do you get to tell people, hey, I have a website, here it is?
So I think that the analytics like that are super important when you're starting out. I think that it depends on what the purpose of the site is. So for myself, this is just a place for me to like house my resume. For when I'm like out places and I'm like, oh, I don't have one, but here you go, you can look at it. So a lot of the stuff like the tracking of who I'm speaking to and stuff like that, I use LinkedIn and Twitter for that, for myself. But I think that if you're using your website for that, it can be a valuable resource since you can track how many people are looking at it, what pages are they spending the most time on. Like, I think you can even track like how often are they scrolling down to the bottom of the page. That's really valuable information that you can use to determine like, should I change the layout of my website? Should I change how many pages I have? All that kind of stuff. So I would definitely recommend using those analytics to your advantage.
How often do you get people trying to use the contact you form?
So I put this site up, what's today, Saturday? On Thursday. So right now, none, but I'm sure there will be a few. But yeah. All right, any other questions? No?
We can all
Yes,
hang out
no?
for a bit.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you taking the time.